Hey guys, we're back again. This time we're going to be looking at something a little more different than our usual affair with Takom's 1/72nd scale HMS Hood 15-inch gun turret. Let's open her on up and take a look. Now, for the most part, naval kits are typically in either 1/700th or 1/35th. You may see a couple 1/200th scale large capital ships, and maybe a sub or two in 72nd scale. So, right away, with the main body of the turret, you can easily tell just how big a battleship in 72nd scale would be. Using my hand as a sort of reference, that immediately tells you just how massive this thing is. Now, getting into the details of the turret, right away, a couple things I noticed were some casting marks here on the upper surface that will require cleanup, as well as a few mold lines here down at the bottom. Overall, a quick round of sandpaper will easily clean this up without too much of a problem. But again, the main thing here is just the size. This lower part is also cast separately, so will need to be attached, but cleanup would be almost nothing. Continuing on, we have the main structure part for the turret. This will ultimately connect into the base. Again, in this unassembled state, there's not a lot to talk about. It's just two very large cast sidewalls. Moving on, we now have the base, which I do like that they include. I know with their earlier releases, their bases were a little more plain, so I like the fact that they've gone in and add this little bit of a surface detail is not the right word, but this bit of detailing on the side, it makes it look nicer. And I think probably with a nice gold will really make this thing stand out. Now, moving on into the surface, and I hope this will show up on camera. They've done a nice job of doing the deck work. Obviously, it will take some time to paint all that up, but once it is, it will really look impressive. Again, check your sources to get some of the coloration right, but overall, difficulty-wise, this thing is not going to be too terribly difficult. Moving on, we've got the blast bags. They're molded as two separate pieces, which you'll then sort of clamshell around the barrels. One thing I will recommend you take note of, and we'll see in a minute, it's probably a good idea to attach these to the individual barrel halves just to help with alignment before you attach the barrels themselves together. As this way, since you'll have a nice flat surface, everything will be even. You won't have to try and play with it once you get it attached. Continuing on, we also have some additional parts for the AA gun that's included with this kit and the railing parts. Railings are very fine and very delicate, so definitely exercise some care clipping them out. Similarly with this ladder that goes up the front of the turret. But overall, no real complaints here. Again, detail work is very nice. Moving on, we now have the parts for the rangefinders for the main turret, as well as the AA gun and the mount that attaches to the top of the turret. Now, this is an optional part, so you don't have to build it with the turret. Alternatively, you could just build the AA gun mount by itself and display it, which is a nice bit of option to include. Much like the main base, again, the internal detail work here on the floor of the AA gun is well cast, as well as all the other details for the hatches and rangefinder. Moving on, we've got all of our parts for the details here on a double sprue, as well as some of the build-up for the A guns. This is the only area in this kit where you are going to have to deal with a lot of fine details. So, especially with these smaller parts. So, again, as with everything, just take your time, go slow, and shouldn't be an issue. My one major complaint, and we'll see again once we get to the barrels, is that you only get this little cap piece for them. You don't get any type of rifling detail or anything. They're just sort of expecting you to paint that black and call it a day. Last up for the sprues, we have another double sprue containing all the vents for the turret, as well as the barrels themselves. Now, this is another area where I'm a little disappointed. I do have another one of their turret kits, which we'll eventually get to, specifically of Scharnhorst, and they include metal barrels with that kit. So, since this is a release that came after that one, I'm a little disappointed that they didn't include, even as just a first release bonus, metal barrels. Because in this size and scale, cleaning these up and making them look right is even more critical, just because of the large size. Now, as I mentioned before, you don't get any type of internal detailing on the barrel. So, this is one thing I'm going to have to weigh my options on whenever I personally get to it, and see about, maybe 3D printing a new barrel, or seeing if there's any aftermarket options at the time. But that's the one area on this kit I'm a little disappointed on. But as for everything else, the detailing is very nice. I'll try to, hopefully this will show up on camera. Overall, no real complaints there. Now, let's go ahead and get into the instructions. Now, as I mentioned before, this is not an overly complicated kit. It's just big. Now, that's both the good and the bad of it. Assembly is pretty straightforward. You build up from the base, building up the turret sidewalls, adding in all the vent details, and then moving on to the turret, which is, as I said, has some of the finer details on it before finally going into the AA gun. And since it is something that could theoretically be done as a separate piece, you don't have to do it at the same time, or you could just as easily do it as its own build. But that is probably one area you're going to spend a fair amount of time, just because it is a bit of a complicated build, especially once you get into adding all the tubing for it. That will probably occupy a lot of time, especially trying to make sure everything stays aligned. So that is an area to watch out for. All that's done before you finally get to the turrets, the barrels. As I mentioned before, it's probably a good idea to do them on a flat surface so you're not trying to make sure everything's properly aligned. It just seems to me it'd be a little easier. And then final assembly. Now, another area I'm disappointed on this kit is the lack of a paint key. They just give you this, and for the alternate option, this one. And that's it. No paint key, no nothing. So, give me a second to get the parts back into the box, and I'll give my closing thoughts. So, overall, I'd say this is an interesting one. Obviously, with a larger scale, there's a lot more detail you can do, and a lot more things you can potentially get away with. Same time, some of the more basic stuff, I feel like could be a little better. As I mentioned, barrels are probably one of the biggest draw on this kit, so the lack of detailing for them is a little disappointing. I do also think just some of the more fiddly bits could have been a little better designed, but I'm not going to fault them too much, because still, at the end of the day, it's a big, massive showpiece kit. It's definitely one, I would say, if you're into naval subject matter, it's almost a must-buy. Everything else, though, it's one you could possibly pass on, but at the same time, you never know. So that was a look at Takom's HMS Hood 15-inch turret in 1/72 scale. A truly big showstopper piece that, is going to be a crown piece for most naval model builders. So until next time.